Thank you all for your contributions. Let's go ahead and get started in today's lecture, right, with what is metaphysics, right? Metaphysics, again, a branch in philosophy that combines all the questions of the discussion of what reality is, right? We're concerned with explaining the fundamental nature of the world around us, the universe, but also of ourselves, right? We are included in the universe, right? So, not just where do we come from, but where does the universe come from as well? There's no specific definition for metaphysics, but I like to see it as more of like the first philosophy, right? The first type of questions, the fundamental questions that we usually ask, right? I mean, before we get into ethics, before we get into technology or science or any progressive idea, we still have to establish what we're doing here, who we are and what we're doing, and what is this world around us, right? So I think metaphysics is one of the first branches in philosophy that you kind of have to start with. And that's why it's our first unit in regards to branches as well. And in short, anytime we kind of look at metaphysics, we have to ask two questions, right? According to their theory or to this theory or that theory, what is there and what is it like? All right, so every theory, every viewpoint is going to ask us, it's going to, try to come up with an answer for that, right? This is what is there and this is what it's like. In other words, this is the substance and this is what the substance is made out of, right? So, and like we talked about before, I like to kind of go historically as well within the branches. And that's kind of how we're going to start this lesson as well, is I want to kind of take you back to the first metaphysical questions with the pre-Socratics, right, who are credited for kind of, starting that conversation of metaphysics, right? Not to say that no one thought about this before the pre-Socratics. I'm sure that a lot of people have thought about reality, right, and what we're doing here and what this all means, right? But I think the pre-Socratics were some of the first that are actually kind of started to look for serious answers within nature to explain what metaphysics or reality may be. All right. But before we get into that, I want to show you a viral video that began in the first part of the internet, the initial era of the internet, I want to say. It's called David After Dentist. Some of you may have seen it. Like I said, it was a viral video. Some of you have not. I've shown this to my other classes, and a lot of my classes are like, I haven't seen this. So I guess that just puts my age. When the internet has errors in it, then I guess that puts me, makes me a little bit older. But David After Dentist was a classic viral video at first, basically the background is the little boy named David was taken to a dentist's office where he was, it looks like, heavily medicated for a procedure. I'm not sure exactly what the procedure was, but the video recorded by his dad here was of him after the procedure while he was still in an altered state of sorts, right? And so David is asking these metaphysical questions almost to the point where he starts to have like a panic attack or a metaphysical crisis, an existential crisis, if you will, just because he's in an altered state and is having kind of trouble understanding that altered reality, right? Now, why are we watching this? We're not just making fun of this kid, but I want you to kind of pay close attention to the questions that David raises and see if you can try to come up with some answers for little David here, right? So without further ado, David After Dentist.
Surgery.
Yeah, I know. How did it go?
I didn't feel anything.
Yeah.
I feel fine.
Kind of felt good, didn't it?
Is this real life?
Yeah, this is real life.
Okay, now I have 2 fingers.
Good.
No, 4 fingers.
4 fingers? No, don't put it in your mouth. Okay? You feel good?
I can't see anything.
Yes, you can. Stay in your seat.
I don't feel tired.
You don't? No?
Do I have stitches?
Uh-huh.
Do I have stitches
Yes.
on my teeth?
Yeah. Don't touch it. Don't.
Why can't I touch it?
Because it'll mess up the stitches.
You have 4 eyes.
Yeah.
I feel funny. Why is this happening to me?
It's okay, bud. It's just from the medicine. Okay?
Is this going to be forever?
No. No, it won't be forever.
Oh.
All right. Poor little David. What are some of the questions that David raises? And you can either type them on the chat or just kind of come off mute and mention them. What is David asking?
Is this real?
Is this real, right? And Beth, how would you answer little David there?
I would probably say no too, because, like from an outside perspective, we don't know what he's seeing. And I wouldn't want to like say that that's real, because what if it's something like terrifying to him? But I honestly don't know. I mean, I would say no because you can't. I don't know.
Yeah. No, some of my other students were like, maybe, somewhat real. That's what being in an altered state when you're high or when you're drunk, right? Is it real? It's like, yes, but you're under the influence. So is it reality? Is it not? Good. Other questions. What else does little David raise here? And again, you can come off mute or type it in the chat.
I mean, this isn't really a question, I guess, like what I noticed, but when he was like, I can't see anything, like it kind of shows how much of like of an altered state that he was in, and how like it like literally his mind was like really warped, I guess you could say, that he probably thought like nothing was real, like in like this kind of dream state of reality he was having, something along the lines
Yeah,
of
his
that.
vision was affected, right? And which, for a lot of us, right, when we answered the do now, we said, what's reality? Oh, things that we can see. So when your vision is altered, then does that mean that your reality is not there anymore, right? Good. Any other questions? Thank you, Sarah. Good. Lola asks, or mentions, David asked, will this last forever? Will this be forever? How would you answer that?
I would say no, it won't last forever, just for a moment. Like you should take a nap, and when you wake up, it'll probably be a little better.
Right, temporary, right? Good. Right. So all these questions, thank you, Brianna, will, help to calm little David's existential crisis here. But now imagine David as an adult, right? David is 20 something now. He is not high. He is not drunk. He is not on medication. Normal reality of sorts. How would you answer those questions, right? Is this real life? Will this be forever? Right? These are all metaphysical questions that, regardless if we're in an altered state, we ask ourselves all the time, right? And that's kind of what metaphysics is, right? Is these existential questions about not just the universe, but also about ourselves too, right? Like, what does it mean to be? What does it mean to exist? How long is it going to last? What happens after we die, right? You know, what's the difference between this reality and say when I'm asleep, or when I'm in an altered state? So, although funny and comical and viral, it does serve to kind of observe such a young mind, and wrestling with these metaphysical questions, because we do it all the time, regardless if we're in an altered state or not, right? So again, metaphysics itself is considered one of the first types of philosophies, right? Because again, we're starting from the bottom. We're starting from the fundamentals, if you will. So the three conversations of metaphysics speaks to kind of other sub conversations that we can have within metaphysics itself, right? So we can talk about universals versus particulars, right? We can talk about, say, the universal idea or the general idea, as opposed to, say, the particular or individual idea or object. For example, when we talk about reality, we can talk about cell phones in general, or we can talk about, say, Anna's specific iPhone, right? And some of y'all talked about this, right? Maybe we can talk about this idea that we have the world's reality or we have an individual's reality, right? So we can talk about universal reality or particular reality, right? Which kind of goes into this idea of realism versus non-realism. Realism is about thinking about things existing whether or not we think about them or not. In other words, this idea of objective reality, right? Here's an example. If, God forbid, but if you were to die at this moment, would the world still exist and continue? Now, depending on how you answer that will determine whether you're a realist or a non-realist. For non-realist, you would say something like, just because I'm not perceiving it, right, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Right? Objective reality exists whether or not we're here to observe it or not. Right? Which goes kind of to the age-old question: if a tree falls in the woods and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? Right? The realist would say yes. Right? Like, of course it makes a sound. We live in a physical universe, and when something heavy hits something hits the floor, it makes some sort of waves of sound. The non-realist would say, well, if there's no one there to perceive it, how can you prove that it does make a sound? Right? Which is a little bit more subjective. Appearance versus reality. Humans observe the world through our senses, like many of us talked about this. Thus, our perceptions only capture the appearance of objects. Our perceptions are good enough, but they can also, in ways, trick us, lie to us. Maybe not on purpose, but they can be flawed sometimes. I mean, there's countless examples of illusions, right? Optical illusions, hallucinations that can occur because of your flawed perception. So if perception is the only tool that we have to really kind of interact with the world, and it itself is flawed, aren't we just getting a flawed version of the world, right? In other words, are we just getting the perception but not the actual appearance? In other words, is it reality just the way it appears to us, or is that how it truly is, right? Would we ever know if we have such a flawed tool, right? In other words, if you have a lens and that lens is dirty, whatever you see is going to be blocked by that dirt, right? In other words, are we really perceiving reality as it is, or is it just an appearance, right? So these are all types of conversations we can have when it comes to metaphysics, right? We can talk about the general versus the particular, or the universal versus the particular, the real objective versus our perception, and whether or not we're actually perceiving that which is really there, or is it just a product of whatever tool we may have at our disposal. Right? So within this conversation, we really have two perspectives, all right, at least that we can start off with today. Reality is either objective or reality is either subjective. And some of y'all talked about this. If reality is objective, the world and its properties exist in a fixed way, no matter what belief or how we perceive it. In other words, whether you were here on Earth or not, life goes on, and Earth exists with or without your opinion or your perception. An example, when scientists measure the temperature, they use instruments to get a reading that should be the same regardless of who is doing the measuring. Right? We realize that there's some objective reality. If we go outside and measure the temperature, that it's a certain temperature, regardless if you like it or not. Right? Some of us, don't like the weather. Cool. It's going to happen regardless if you like it or not. Right? Now, some of us think maybe reality is subjective, whereas reality depends on the individual. Subjective experiences can vary widely between people. That you can't say it's the same for everyone, right? Sometimes that we experience reality subjectively, and there might be truth to that, right? Some people are colorblind, right? Some people are blind. Some people are deaf. Some people have disabilities that have them perceive reality differently than from what some people may do. So to say that there's only one reality or some objective reality might be too strict for the metaphysics conversation, right? Because reality may be subjective. An example could be saying that it is too cold outside for a walk. That is subjective because it reflects your personal emotions and feelings, right? If you're like a healthy young person, maybe it's not too cold for a walk. If you're a baby, if you're an older person, maybe it is too cold, right? So then who has the real grasp on reality? Well, they all do, right? Reality may be subjective, right? So it seems like there's always these two perspectives kind of coming into play, whether reality is objective and or reality is subjective, right? That's another way to kind of start to talk about metaphysics. I do recommend following the excerpts from our textbook. Chapter 2, specifically page 19 and 20, talks a little bit about how the metaphysics conversation began as well. Right? So now that we've kind of established the types of metaphysical questions that we can ask, the question then becomes, okay, now we've asked the questions, how can we find the answers? Right? So where can I find the answers to these metaphysical questions? Well, at the beginning of our historical survey here, really there was two areas, and I think one of us mentioned it during the Do Now, right? It seems like not just in the Mexican culture, but in just the world around us, there's two paths. Either you look at it through observation, right, of nature, or something perhaps beyond nature, the supernatural, right? So really there's two avenues that we can kind of look for these metaphysical answers. One is through nature, which began as cosmology, which examines the universe's origins, evolution, structure, dynamics, and fate, along with the natural laws that govern it, right? And those early kind of thinkers, specifically the pre-Socratics, were known as these people that wanted to find the answers within nature. So we call them the physiologi, right? Who started the conversation, laid the groundwork for those seeking natural explanations. They were one of the first scientific minds. Because if you really think about it, before the pre-Socratics, not to say that there were any, observationists there, but a lot of the answers to what we're doing here and why we're here were very mythological and religious, right? They're beyond nature, right? There's like, why are we here? The gods, perhaps. What the pre-Socratics did is they kind of turned that into a more empirical, natural kind of way of looking at the world, right? Again, and so we make that distinction. The physiologi are those that look for answers in nature, whereas the theologi would perhaps look for answers beyond nature, right? And perhaps more religious or supernatural or spiritual answers. And guess what? This these avenues continue to this day. It seems like you either follow science or you follow religion. It reminds me of Nacho Libre, right? Where it's just like, I forgot what Esqueleto says, but he's something like, you don't like me because I only believe in science or something like that. But yeah, that's part of the conversation as well, right? So again, starting the conversation, the Pre-Socratics. Pre-Socratics, again, were early Greek thinkers who shifted explanations of the world from mythological to rational inquiry, right? So from beyond nature to let's find the answer within nature. By seeking natural principles behind the cosmos, they laid the groundwork for science and philosophy, profoundly influencing Western thought. So they wanted to find the answers for themselves, right, to these metaphysical questions. And so the Pre-Socratics are credited for kind of, again, starting the conversation. Now, a couple things. One, they were called Pre-Socratics because obviously they became before Socrates, and really Socrates, Aristotle, and Socrates, Plato, Aristotle were kind of like the big three in Western philosophy, right? Yes, they're known for kind of setting most of the ideas that the world still kind of deals with today, right? They were the most influential philosophers, I want to say. But that is not to say that the Pre-Socratics really didn't have influence, right? They're the ones that actually started the groundwork, and as we see here in the slide as well, really kind of started the groundwork for that scientific observation, I want to say. Right? So they wanted to find the answers within the world and within nature, not just in some supernatural or mythical story of sorts, right? So the Pre-Socratics is really where we start with our historical survey on metaphysics. And so I have here a short video that kind of talks about some of the Pre-Socratics that we'll get into, and perhaps their views on metaphysics. Remember, we're still trying to ask the two questions. What is there? What is it like? And so these Pre-Socratics really wanted to answer those questions. What is there and what is it like? And each one of those Pre-Socratics really had a different conclusion. They had a different idea or a different answer to those questions. So that's what we're going to see. What did they think was the substance to the universe? What is the universe like? What is it about? What is it made out of? All right, so here we go. The Pre-Socratics in 4 minutes.
Thales of Miletus. Thales of Miletus lived around 624 to 546 BCE, is often recognized as the first philosopher in the Western tradition. Originating from Miletus in ancient Ionia, Thales is best known for proposing that water is the fundamental substance underlying all of nature, a revolutionary idea suggesting a naturalistic explanation of the world as opposed to mythological interpretations. His hypothesis marked the dawn of philosophical inquiry into the nature of existence. Thales also made significant contributions to mathematics and astronomy, famously predicting a solar eclipse. His work laid the groundwork for future philosophers, blending scientific observation with philosophical speculation about the cosmos. Anaximander. Anaximander of Miletus lived from about 610 to 546 BCE. He was a student of Thales, introduced the idea of the apeiron, or the boundless, as the source of everything, unlike Thales' concept of water. He viewed the apeiron as an eternal, unbreakable foundation from which everything comes and eventually returns. Anaximander is also famous for his groundbreaking work in astronomy, geography, and biology, including creating the first world map and suggesting ideas about how life evolves. His contributions represent a major advance in early science and philosophy. Anaximenes. Anaximenes of Miletus lived around 585–528 BCE. He followed Anaximander, believed that air is the basic element that everything comes from. He thought that air changes into different forms of matter through thinning, rarefaction, and thickening, condensation. According to him, the variety we see in nature is due to air's different states. This idea made the concept of change in the natural world more understandable and focused on things we can observe. Anaximenes' theories advanced the Milesian school's efforts to find the fundamental substance of the universe, highlighting air's crucial role. Pythagoras. Pythagoras of Samos lived from around 570 to 495 BCE. He was an important Greek philosopher and mathematician, famous for creating the Pythagorean theorem. But he did a lot more than that. He started a group called the Pythagoreans, who thought that numbers were the most important thing in the universe. Pythagoras and his group believed everything in the universe was connected through numbers, affecting music, stars, and how people should live. They followed strict rules about what to eat, how to act, and studying hard, because they thought it linked physical and spiritual health and helped understand the universe's sacred order. Heraclitus. Heraclitus of Ephesus lived from about 535 to 475 BCE. He's known for saying that everything is always changing, which is like saying, you can't step into the same river twice because the water is always moving. He thought fire was the main symbol for change and transformation. Heraclitus also believed that opposite things are connected and both are needed for things to change. His ideas focus on the idea that everything is always becoming something else, not just staying the same, showing that movement and conflict are natural parts of the universe. Parmenides of Elea, who lived around the late 500s or early 400s BCE, changed philosophy by saying that change isn't real, and that reality is one unchanging thing that lasts forever. Unlike Heraclitus, who thought everything is always changing, Parmenides believed that what we see and feel can trick us. He wrote a poem called On Nature that laid the groundwork for metaphysics, a type of philosophy that focuses on what's beyond what we can see and touch. He stressed thinking logically over just trusting our senses. And this way of thinking started to shape Western philosophy, making people think more about unchangeable truths. Empedocles. Empedocles of Acragas, who lived from about 495 to 435 BCE, came up with the idea that everything is made of 4 elements: earth, air, fire, and water. He said that 2 forces, love, which brings things together, and strife, which pulls things apart, control how these elements mix and split apart. This explains why things in nature change and why there's so much variety. Empedocles' ideas were some of the first to help people start thinking scientifically and philosophically about what the world is made of and how it works.
Good. Now,
Thales of Miletus.
even though, like I said, some of these answers or conclusions that the pre-Socratics arrived at are obviously later on proven false by science, I think the idea here is that they should be credited for starting the conversation. All right, so let's go over some of these pre-Socratic philosophers again. Again, when you're asking the question, what is there and what is it like, you're really asking about the inner workings of the universe, right? And the question really came down to, what do you think the universe is made of, right? Kind of like the third question from Arduino. And so for Thales, proposed that water was a fundamental substance of the universe, right? He's known for his belief that the world can be understood through rational inquiry and observation. So he's looking at he's observing the world around him, and he realizes, man, there's water everywhere, right? And to a certain extent, he's correct, right? The world, Earth is mainly made out of water, right? That we know of. Our bodies are mostly made out of water, right? It rains from the sky and it helps things grow. So water is super important for our livelihood. So then perhaps that is the answer. Perhaps everything's made out of water, right? Not bad for an explanation, right? And for many other thinkers, that serves as a good contender for the answer what universe is made out of, right? Another important pre-Socratic here, Heraclitus. Heraclitus believed that everything was in flux. Everything was always changing. So his view of the world was that it wasn't static, it wasn't still, that there's always change and growth. And so when it was his turn to kind of look for what the substance of the universe is, or the fundamental substance of the universe is, he realized that the one thing that is always changing and never kind of stay still was fire, right? If you've ever kind of just stared at a fire, it's never going to be the same. It's always changing, right? There's no pattern to follow within the fire, that it's just always in flux. He says, perhaps the universe is made out of fire because it's always changing as well, and nothing stays still. Not bad of an answer. to definitely kind of brings upon the idea of chaos as an element of the universe, right? Chaos theory can be the child of Heraclitus' thinking, I think. Then on the kind of polar spectrum, we have Parmenides, where Parmenides argued that change in multiplicity, kind of like within Heraclitus' thinking, was actually an illusion, and that reality is unchanging and singular, that we are all kind of materially connected. You, me, your computer, the fire, everything is connected, even though we cannot see that connection. I know, it's like, wait, what do you mean? And so if we're all connected, kind of like a puzzle, then there is no individuality, there's no motion. And so motion itself and change is an illusion. It's kind of like, when you take a picture, right, then that's the true reality of us. Right? The only reason why we think that things move and change is because time. So time is an illusion itself, but really the world is one big piece. Now, I think for us, since we are living in a 3D space-time realm, there's like, no, that sounds silly. But we are now kind of learning that the space between us, the space between everything, may not be completely empty. Right? That we just discovered something called dark matter, which kind of exists within the empty space that we thought was empty. Right? So Parmenides may be onto something after all, that we are all connected materially. We just had not seen it or understood it. Right? Zeno of Elea, a student of Parmenides, he's known for his paradoxes, right? He kind of continued through Parmenides' conversation of things not being as they seem, right? One of Zeno's story was this idea of, credited to Aesop's fables, if you will, was of the rabbit and the turtle story, right? If you guys remember that from grade school, the rabbit and the turtle go on a race, right? The turtle gets a head start, right? Because the rabbit's like, he's too slow. I'm going to beat him anyway. So I'm going to take a nap and let the turtle go and win, right? Besides the ending of the story and the moral behind it, Zeno asks, how is it possible that the turtle being ahead of the rabbit, right? That he asks the question, will the rabbit ever catch the tortoise if at first the rabbit has to cross the halfway point to get to the tortoise? And then before that happens, he has to cross that halfway point of the halfway point. And before that happens, he has to cross the halfway point of that halfway point. And Zeno asks, if you can have an infinite amount of halfway points, right? If you can divide a number infinitely, right? Will the rabbit ever get to the turtle? And so what he came across was this paradox, the paradox of infinity, realizing that even though infinity exists in our minds, it doesn't exist in the physical world, right? So he kind of laid the groundwork for this idea of a singular reality and unchanging, and also mainly paradoxes, right? So interesting stuff there too. Pythagoras, known as the kind of religious founder of the movement that posited that numbers were the most important thing in the universe. Right? He kind of not just kind of pushed the influence of mathematics, but he kind of made this more mystical, spiritual aspect of math too. He believed not just that the universe was made of numbers and whatnot, but that God itself was perhaps a number, right? Reality is based on numbers, and he's not that far off, right? Because we can really kind of break down everything to sets of coordinates and numbers, right? You can be broken down to your weight, your height, your location, all based on numbers, coordinates, right? Your space time, what time it is today, what year you were born, right? How long you lived, right? It seems like the world around us can be broken down to numbers. So perhaps numbers are the fundamental aspects of reality. Right? Democritus, he is credited with the development of the atomic theory. He just the idea that perhaps everything is composed of small particles, right? These ideas of atoms, regardless if we know exactly what atoms are or what they're made out of, is the atomic theory that Democritus kind of began. So again, even though these pre-Socratic philosophers may have been a little off in their conclusion of what reality may be or the universe may be, they did kind of start the conversation to many other avenues in philosophy and science that we kind of can credit them, right? And now, usually, depending on where you end up as far as your own metaphysics is concerned, you can kind of also talk about it in the sense of the following avenues of thought. If you believe that reality is made up of a singular substance, in other words, everything can be broken down to one substance, then you're what we consider to have or be is a monist, or believe in the idea of monism. Right? Monism, again, reality made up of one substance. Right? So most of these pre-Socratics could be considered monists, right? Thales was a monist because he believed water was the ultimate. Heraclitus with fire. Parmenides believed that everything was one big old puzzle piece, if you will. Zeno as well. For Pythagoras, it was the one substance was numbers, right? And so the ancient world was modeled after, I think, this belief in monism, right? That everything can be broken down to one singular substance. And then came along a deep thinker around the modern era, post-Renaissance era, named Descartes, who gave us a different view of reality called dualism. Dualism is the belief that reality is made up of two types of substances, right? And for him, it was really more like a physical, non-physical, or as we now know, mind and body. In fact, if you believe you have a body and you believe you have a mind, you can credit Descartes for giving you that framework of reality, right? Because again, before, really, monism kind of reigned the day, whereas now dualism becomes the standard. In fact, so much of a standard that I'm pretty sure most of the people in this classroom are dualists in some sort of faction, right? Or fashion. The third option is what we call pluralism, the belief that the reality is made up of multiple substances. And this can be probably credited to religion as well, because now you believe you have a mind and a body, right? A body and mind, and perhaps a soul or a spirit that carries on, thereafter, right? So these are three different types of substances, where the mind and the soul might be similar, but completely different types of substances, right? So depending on where you kind of end up within these avenues of thought, that's where you're kind of going to continue and formulate and framework your own version of metaphysics, right? Now, as a follow-up question, looking at monism, dualism, pluralism, looking at, say, the modern world of science, do you think that where do you think you would classify science and scientists within these three avenues? Do you think scientists are monists, dualists, or pluralists? Right. You can come off mute or type it in the chat. What do y'all guys think? Think scientists are monists, dualists, or pluralists? All right, so Gregory, Kevin, John.
I feel that it really depends on the sciences. I mean, you got different type of scientists. For instance, you got scientists that may believe like the world is flat, but then you got scientists like I just feel like you got so many different scientists, and it's hard to say that every scientist is just one.
Okay, good. Now, I don't know if I would classify the flat Earth thinkers as scientists, but hey, you can.
But what is the definition of a scientist then?
Okay,
So I
good.
determine what is a scientist.
Right. In other words, the scientist could be someone that looks for answers in the natural world, right? So based on the scientific method and observation. In other words, it's very important, I think, Donovan, your question of what defines a scientist, because scientists find the answers only with that which they can observe, right? And that's very important. So if you can't really observe it, then it doesn't exist for scientists, right? Now, looking at these other options, we can observe our body, but can you really observe a non-physical aspect, like say your mind?
And that's my argument. Like it's if you look at the definition of a scientist and then you compare it to what a lot of scientists are, technically they wouldn't be a scientist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I would conclude to the definition that whatever a scientist is a person that uses observation as their main kind of methodology, right? So, for example, and now would the cat's out of the bag. I think scientists now are considered monists because they only believe in what can be observed, what can be proven through the scientific method. And at this point, the only thing that can be proven is a physical thing, substance that we call matter, right? Scientists only believe in the physical universe. And so they only believe that matter exists. And that's what we call materialism, right? In other words, scientists believe that matter is the only thing available within our universe. So would a scientist believe in a non-physical aspect of reality? The answer is no, unless it could be observed. And if it could be observed, then it's probably material in some form or fashion. It's like somebody tells me, it's like, well, do scientists believe in ghosts? It's like they would believe in ghosts if they can observe them. In other words, if you see a ghost, that means that they exist. But if in order for you to see a ghost, you have to have light reflect off that object into your eyes to see it, right? Which means that whatever's bouncing off that object has to have some sort of physicality behind it. We cannot see non-physical things, right? And in other words, if ghosts exist, there have to be in some way or shape or form physical in order for us to literally see it, right? So, and again, we'll continue this conversation as well. But yeah, now I want to think about you, right? Like, yes, science is monistic in a way, but what about you? Do you still believe in the mind and the body? Or maybe you're a pluralist and believe in not just body, mind, but also your soul or spirit, or perhaps God as a different type of substance, right? And so you're going to answer that in our exit ticket. All right, thank you all for this conversation today. Here is your exit ticket. 1, do you find anything awkward or weird about reality? Or does it, no, it's perfect. It's fine the way it is. 2, out of the pre-Socratics that we talked about, which one do you think had a better understanding of the world? Perhaps they were off, perhaps they were wrong ultimately, but which one do you side with the most? And be like, yeah, I think this person was pretty good understanding so far. Or you just like their theories. 3, do you consider yourself a monist, dualist, or pluralist when it comes to metaphysics? And why? All right, so once you are complete with your exit ticket, then you're free to go.